now I want to jump into talking about lists and loops. Okay, so lists are one of the most fundamental things you'll use in Python. A lot of things you use, well, I use Python outside of teaching for a lot of data analysis, and so I use things called arrays, which are kind of like lists of lists. So in essence, lists are one of the things that I use the most. Okay, so let's talk about lists. When you want to consider many values at once rather than just one, you'll use a list. So here is some ways lists are defined. So A is equal to, when you're defining a list, put a bracket around it, and then put the things in your list and close your bracket. And now I have A, and then I have this list over here. Notice these numbers above my list elements, this 0, 1, 2, 3. Those are called the indices. Okay, so this element 15 lives at index 0. Python starts counting at 0. That's an important thing to remember. So if I want to grab a hold of this element, I'll type the name of my list and then the index 0, and that's how B is defined. B is A bracket 0. So look, B is saved as 15 because that is the 0th element in my list. C is going to be A2, so that will grab onto 34. C is saved as 34. I can use negative indices. Okay, when I use a negative index, that, well, it counts backward and loops back around. So if D is going to be A negative 1, that's going to be saved as 87. And here in these instructions up here, try index negative 2. So that's something that I encourage you to try on your own. Try that sometime. Okay. And then E is going to give us this construction called the length, len of A. That tells us how many values are in there. So there are 4 of them. Now here's something that tends to trip people up. Okay. This list, the indices go up to 3, but it has length 4. That's because Python starts counting at 0. Always remember that. The last index in your list will be 1 less than the length of your list. Another way to say that is the length of your list will be 1 more than the last index in your list. It's an important thing to remember. Please do that. Okay. Now there are some more examples of this in the notes that are on D2L under lists and loops. I'm not going to go through these, but I encourage you to try these out. Put these in Python Tutor, try these print commands and see what happens. And as always, watch the embedded videos for even more examples. But I'm going to go on down to for loops. And I think I may have called if and while and these things loops. They're these are if statements. So while is a type of loop, but when we talk about a loop now, we're going to talk about for loops. Okay, so a for loop is we're going to go through the elements in a certain range of values. So before we do that, let's talk about this command right here, range. So let me go into Python Tutor, and we can do this. So before I do that, before I do anything, let's talk about the range function. I'm going to print range of, let's say 5. Sorry, I'll have to do it like this. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I just want to go through this construction because this does exactly what I wanted it to do. As long as I put this command in first to illustrate something. Length of nums. Yeah, this is what I wanted to do. All right, so starting out, I'm going to define nums to be this list of 4 elements, 10, 30, 20, 50. Okay. Then I want to print out how long that is. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 elements in that list, so that's going to be 4. Okay. And now for I in the range 0 to length of nums. So I'm going to put in a comment here and say that range from 0 to ling nums is the same as the range 0 to 4, because that's what the length of nums is. It's 4. Okay, so that's what I'm really doing here. I'm doing the range of 0 to 4. And for I in that range, I'm going to print something out. So I want you to watch what happens with the variables here. So I is 0 starting out. Okay? And this is going to help us understand what the range is. So starting out, I is going to be 0. And I'm going to print the word index, I, and the value, and then that element, the corresponding element in my list. So what happens is I get index 0, value 10. So index 0, I get the value 10. Okay? So what happens next in this for statement? Okay? Started out I is 0. Look, I changed to 1. I went up to 1. Same thing, I'm going to get index value 1, index 1 value 30 because of this. Next, I is going to change to 2, and I'm going to print this out. Now, index is 2, value is 20. Next, I changed to 3, so I'm going to get this, and we're done. There's nothing else to do. So when you think about what is in the range, I'm going to write this as a command. So what's in range of 0 to 4? Well, it's 0, 1, 2, and 3. We stop before we get to the last number in the range. Okay, stop before you get to the last number in the range. And that's how range works. And this is also how the for loops work. Okay, that's not the only way you can do range. Let me clear this out and look at something else. I'm going to say for I in range of 5, just the integer 5, I'm going to print I. Well, what's going to happen here? Starting out I is 0. So we're trying to figure out what range of 5 might be. Starts out at 0. Going to print out 0. Then it's going to jump up to 1. Prints 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're done. So if you just put a single number in, the range of 5 is going to be the same as the range of 0 to 5. So I encourage you to do a little bit of digging on Python and maybe look at some syntax sheets that someone may have shared with you and look at the different things you can do with range, okay? Because that's how we're going to use for loops a lot. All right, and here's some more discussion about what range actually does that I encourage you to look at. All right, what about for loops without indices? Well, let's look at this one. Here I'm just not going to even talk about the range or the which index these things are at. I'm just going to cycle through the elements of my list directly. So nums is saved as 10, 30, 20, 40, and for x in nums, print out value comma x. So let's see what happens. So starting out, I have my list saved over here. And now x is my variable, and x is going to cycle directly through the elements in my list. Not even worrying about playing around with those indices. So it's going to print the string value and then whatever x is. So I'm going to print value 10. Then the for makes me cycle through all the elements. So now it's going to jump to 30. And it's going to print value in 30. Now it's going to jump to the next element in my list from 30 to 20. See that changed? It's going to print out value 20, go to the next one, value 50, and then we're done. So the point is you don't have to use the indices to cycle through a list like that. Sometimes you want to, sometimes you don't. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. The notes on D2L again have this general syntax for a loop. For item in list, do this thing. Do this thing. Okay. I just did this one, but play around with some more. Make sure you watch these videos and work through these practice problems. Let's go through this last example and kind of see what happens to it. So grades is going to be this list. Total equals 0 starting out. And now for G in grade, so G is my variable, It's going to cycle through all of these elements in grades. And every time I do that, I'm going to change the total by adding to it the value of G. So watch. So starting out, total started out as 0. Now G is 99. Now I'm going to run this line. So watch what happens to total. It changes to 99. Now G is going to go to the next element in the list, 88. Now total is going to change because I'm going through all the elements in my list and I'm adding them to my total. So next is 95, that gets added. Next is 101, that gets added. Next is 65, that gets added. And now we're on the last element of my list, so I'm going to exit the for loop and go down to line 5. Average is going to be total divided by len of grades. Oh, we're calculating an average. We added up all of the elements in this list with this for loop, and now we're going to divide by how many of them there are. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we're calculating an average. So average is going to be total divided by len of grades to get 89. And then I'm going to print out the string average is and what the average was, right? Okay, so notice what we used for division and think about and try what would be different if we just use a single /. What would that change? So go ahead and try that out.